Slowly but surely, so-called Islamic State's caliphate is being destroyed in Syria and Iraq. IS is losing battle after battle on the ground. But it's too early to say it's lost the war, because as the state fails, it will continue in other forms.
It is a proto-state in Raqqa and Mosul and over those areas. It's also an insurgency across Syria and Iraq, and it's a terrorist movement to us here in the West. It occupies all of these three states simultaneously. Just because it's being pushed back as a state, that does nothing to resolve its other two dimensions.
So what does this mean for the UK terror threat? Around 850 jihadists from Britain have gone out to Syria to fight with IS. 15% have died. Half of the remainder, about 360, have already returned here, but many of these are early adopters and may pose a lesser threat.
People who went in 2012 were motivated by very different things to someone who went in 2015. The drivers of their radicalization, the pull, the allure was all very different. When we talk about returnees in the UK and the people who have come back, they're pretty much people who went earlier on.
Many of those still in Syria will want to stay and die fighting. And even if they did try to return, security sources have told Newsnight that MI5 knows the identities of most of the 850 British fighters who volunteered. So getting back into the UK undetected would be very difficult. Plus, Turkey and transit countries are cooperating with intelligence.
We know of one case of an individual with IS who did return to the UK, who used a land route. So he travelled through various countries by road, by car, and jumped on a ferry in the end and came across to the UK. When he did, the police had been monitoring him and tracking him the whole way across Europe. So as soon as he set foot on these shores, he was arrested, he's been convicted, he's serving a sentence right now in Belmarsh prison.
In Syria, IS's gradual defeat may actually spur supporters in the West to launch more low-tech attacks. Official security sources have told Newsnight there's been a marked shift in IS propaganda, and this now is a major threat against the UK, not from fighters physically returning from Syria. In the early years of the self-declared caliphate, the message was all about travelling out to Syria to help build the Islamic State. Now the message to supporters in the West is to stay away and attack the kuffar, the disbelievers, at home. The most recent attacks in Spain illustrate this well. The leader of the plot, a preacher, was blown up in the group's bomb factory. There's some evidence he spent time in prison with one of the terrorists responsible for the 2004 Al-Qaeda train bombings in Madrid. But there is no evidence yet of any direct link with Syria.
We have no evidence to prove that any of the attackers have been to the conflict area. Most of the attacks we've discovered in Catalonia and Spain in the last few years have been inspired by propaganda found online. But it's usually low-key incidents, mainly propaganda and small-scale terrorist financing or sending recruits to the caliphate.
So how do you stop low-tech attacks using trucks or knives? It's become much harder as the threat has diversified. In the decade after 9/11, Al-Qaeda plots were relatively sophisticated, planned over many months. There was a chain of command, networks to penetrate, communications to intercept. So is a shift in counter-terror tactics today required to combat the emerging threat across Europe?
It's important to tackle the threat at all stages, from the process of catching new recruits to Islamic State, dealing with self-starters who are attracted to their propaganda, and police techniques to detect and dismantle these extremist groups at an early stage.
Security sources here in the UK have told Newsnight that when intelligence does not meet the threshold for terrorist prosecutions, then they look for evidence of lesser crimes. Arrests are then made to disrupt networks and plots.
A lot of people, myself included, would like to see the authorities being far more disruptive in terms of arrests and prosecutions of people who are engaging with this material, who are engaging with spreading terrorist content, who are looking at that content and disseminating it online. There needs to be a much tougher and proactive legislative approach towards this, and arrest approach towards this.
One former counter-terrorism police officer told us that low-level crime often features in terrorist investigations. But he says the UK has preferred to run investigations long, with the aim of securing terrorist convictions.
We might find evidence of theft or credit card fraud or something like that, and we would disrupt them for that. So in terrorism, it's simply the same thing. It's just an organised criminal network, and for many years I've been saying I don't know why we don't go after them for other criminality.
Given that MI5 has 500 active investigations, 6 plots have been stopped since the Westminster Bridge attack in June, disruption by prosecuting for low-level offences is likely to become an increasingly vital tool.